Society of Physics students and put on by the wonderful Atlanta Science Festival, of which they have many more events, and you should go to every single one of these possibly can because they're all really cool. If you don't know what they are, just look them up online. Google Atlanta Science Festival. It's pretty great. Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Selby, and I've been working with these fantastic 5 performers as well as a whole host of volunteers to make this event happen for you guys. What's going to be happening tonight, if you don't know, these 5 speakers are going to be giving 7-minute presentations on their passion in science. After that, they're going to hold 2 minutes of questions and answers from you guys, the wonderful audience. And then after they're all done speaking, you and the judges are going to decide whether or not they deserve to win cash money. Judges, raise your hands. Thank you so much for coming, you two. The judges will be deciding among them who wins the $1,000 grand prize. But it is your job as the audience to fill out the ballots that we have given you. If you don't have a ballot, make sure you get one from a seat that does have a ballot but no one's sitting at it. Fill out your ballots, and then we will collect them shortly after our last presenter talks, as well as fill out the nice little survey for the Atlanta Science Festival and how great we are. And then whoever wins your vote is going to get an extra $250. Your vote is very, very important, because how many of you would like to win $250? Good, exactly. If you would like that to be bestowed upon your favorite speaker tonight, make sure you circle their name on your ballot, put your name and your email up top, and we'll make that happen. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first speaker tonight. His name is Spitz. Steven is a PhD student in physics at Georgia Tech, and if you ever wondered about the heart of a champion, you're about to find out.
Not so much champion, actually. So, before I begin, I actually have a small confession to make. Not the right presentation. Not the right dough. It's on the desktop.
Oh, sorry.
What do you want? It's on the desktop.
Cool.
The confession, I actually did not make this presentation. It was made by one of my fellow physics students named John, who at some point had to give a very similar talk on the state of research funding in the United States. And I actually have not really even looked at the slides yet, but I don't think this is going to be a huge issue, because I know John pretty well. He's a physics PhD student, and one thing you learn about these guys pretty quick is that they love to complain. For them, it's practically an Olympic sport. For a lot of us, it's actually our only sport. And so one of the things we complain a lot about is the state of research funding. And you guys are all into science, so you realize there's not a lot of research funding to go around to fund all the grad students and postdocs and the equipment we need to do all the experiments we want to do. So I'm pretty sure what John had in store for us here is a couple slides. So research funding in recent years plummeting, and I'll probably throw in at the end some really inspirational conclusion about how everyone here needs to fund more research, and in particular, how all you guys here need to fund my research. So if everyone could just get their checkbooks out right now, I think that'll really facilitate what I have stored for the very end of the presentation. So let's see what John had on the first slide. This reminds me too that John assured me this presentation is in 3D. So if everyone could take out the glasses that have been provided to you under your seats. Okay, so there's no glasses. All right. So I'm just going to have to give this presentation in the normal 2D in which we live our day-to-day lives. Could be worse. Could be like the old days where you'd have to give it in 1D. But so on this slide, you can see on the top line, we have the total research and development spending in the U.S. as a function of GDP. And this actually does not say what I thought it was going to say. That top line shows that research and development spending has been constant at about 2.5% of GDP over the last 50 or 60 years. So off to a bad start, I guess. But those 2 lines below that are kind of interesting. You have one line trending down. That's the line for federal government's research and development spending. So the federal government has been funding less and less research. and another line trending up. That's the spending from non-federal sources, so mostly from probably business and the private sector. I find this pretty interesting because one of the most important things the federal government does is fund basic research. So businesses would mostly be interested in funding things for which it's obvious they can develop a product to sell for a profit. But basic research would be things where it's not exactly clear what the applications are going to be. So something like general theory of relativity, or string theory, or Twitter. So, hopefully on this next slide what John has for us is something showing basic research funding plummeting over time. Okay, give me a second, it's a complicated slide. So everything I just said apparently totally wrong. So those top two lines show a breakdown of what's called development funding for research. That'd be things used to develop new products. So that yellow line trending downward is development spending from the government. So the government's been funding less and less development research. And we have the orange line trending up, which is development spending from industry. So industry has been replacing a lot of government spending. You can see at the bottom, actually, funding for basic research has also been pretty much flat over time. So at this point, I could say, in conclusion, my presentation has not really gone that well. It's not sure what I want to say, unless John has one last slide for us, can help us out. So finally, this is pretty interesting. The middle line in blue, so this graph breaks down research spending by subject area. How much research money is going to fund, for instance, physics or chemistry or biology research. And that middle line in blue shows that funding for physics research has actually been cut in half over the last maybe 40 years. So that actually explains a lot about why in the physics department things feel so tight all the time. The other interesting feature of this graph is that top line in orange. See around the year 2000, funding for life sciences, so things like biology or medical science research funding, actually got a huge bump, maybe close to double. So at this point, you might decide that I'm just a bitter physics student who chose the wrong field. Everything's fine. Money's just drying up where I decided to do research. But I would actually argue that this hasn't worked out that great for people in the life sciences either. It was great initially when they got that big bump in funding. They were able to hire a lot more people, get a lot more equipment and space to do more research. But then you have recent developments like the budget sequester, where they've seen huge slashes in funding again. A lot of those people now have trouble finding jobs, and a lot of that space and equipment now lies pretty much totally fallow and unused. So, and they've really set up kind of a boom and bust cycle in the way they write grants. So I think this really points to what's the real problem in the way we fund research today. And that's that it's basically a battlefield mentality in which researchers are constantly having to justify why research is important and why we need to fund it. What I think we should probably do is just once and for all have this discussion and agree that yes, research is important. It's something we need to fund consistently and reliably, year after year. And that way, the researchers can focus less on fighting the government for all this funding and more on the research that's going to make everyone's lives better in the end. Now take some questions.